In 2026, Billy Butcher opened a classified file inside a London government server that had no record of being created. By the time he finished watching it, his own name had been replaced in 3 separate national databases, and no one in the building would look him in the eye. It started on a Tuesday morning. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a Tuesday. Butcher had been brought in as a consultant to the Department for Justice Coordination on a routine intelligence authentication job, verifying biometric records of registered superhumans for a new government registry. He was not supposed to be touching anything else. He was not cleared for anything else. But Billy Butcher had never been the kind of man who stayed inside the lines drawn for him, and that morning was no different. The office was the kind of place designed to make you forget time existed. Fluorescent lights humming at a frequency just irritating enough to keep you from relaxing, casting everything in a pale wash that made skin look slightly wrong and paper look slightly yellow. Gray carpet, worn thin in the paths between desks that everyone took without thinking. Identical workstations with identical monitor stands and identical plastic trays full of identical paperwork. The smell of printer toner hung in the recycled air alongside someone's reheated lunch, something with fish in it, and the distant sound of a photocopier cycling through a long job somewhere down the hall. It was the kind of environment engineered, consciously or not, to produce compliance, to make ambition feel embarrassing. Butcher sat at a terminal in the corner, his leather jacket thrown over the back of the chair, scrolling through superhuman registration files with the mechanical disinterest of a man doing a job he considered beneath him. He was 40 minutes in when he saw it, buried between 2 routine record entries, a timestamp from May 25, 2026, followed by a file string that made no immediate sense. The name was long, almost like a system glitch. It read, "What if Billy Butcher became the Ultim?" It was cut off. Whatever came after Ultim had been truncated as if the system had choked on it. There was no author tag, no department code, no clearance level assigned. Just the file, sitting there in the archive like something that had fallen through a crack from somewhere else entirely. Butcher's hand stopped moving. He had spent years learning to trust that feeling in his gut, the one that said something is wrong here, something is very wrong here, and if you don't pay attention right now, you are going to regret it. He had trusted it in dark rooms and bright corridors, and standing over the bodies of people who had stopped trusting their own instincts at exactly the wrong moment. He felt it now, hard, like a fist closing around something vital. He double-clicked. The file opened into video footage. Grainy, overexposed at the edges, the kind of visual quality that felt like it had been filmed in one era and compressed through another, the colors slightly wrong in the way that real things sometimes are. But what was on the screen was sharp enough, clear enough, more than clear enough. It was London. The skyline was recognizable, the Shard catching flat gray light, the Thames a dark ribbon behind the crowd, the dome of St. Paul's visible in the background between buildings. But the streets were wrong. Crowds packed the public squares in the kind of organized mass that doesn't happen spontaneously, the kind that requires infrastructure and permission and weeks of planning. They were there for something, for someone. Enormous banners hung between buildings, red letters on black backgrounds, and Butcher leaned forward in his chair, elbows on the desk, and got closer to the screen because he needed to be sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. His own face, printed 6 stories tall on the side of a building, his name beneath it in block capitals. Not a wanted poster, not a news report, a portrait, the kind they put up for heads of state. The footage cut to a podium. Outdoor. Hundreds of people in the frame behind it, thousands more implied by the noise bleeding through the static. And standing at that podium, commanding the crowd with the kind of body language that belongs to a man who has never once doubted his right to be exactly where he is, was Billy Butcher. His Billy Butcher. Same scar along the jaw, same set to the shoulders, same way of occupying space like he intended to stay there. But the eyes were different in one specific way that Butcher could not look away from. They were not angry. They were not desperate. They were satisfied. The man at the podium was satisfied in a way that the real Billy Butcher had never once been in his entire life, and something about that distinction felt more disturbing than anything else on the screen. The audio was buried in static, but the rhythm of it came through. The cadence of a man giving orders dressed up as a speech. The crowd responded in waves, not the ragged, unpredictable noise of people moved by something genuine, but something more uniform, more practiced. It was not inspiration. It was compliance dressed as enthusiasm, and Butcher recognized the difference immediately because he had seen Homelander do exactly the same thing from a different podium in a different city, and it had made him want to burn the world down. Except now he was the one on the podium. He sat back in his chair. His mouth was dry. He reached for his coffee, missed the cup entirely, his fingers closing around nothing, and did not look away from the screen even then. Then the screen went black. Not a power cut, not a system crash. The rest of the terminal was still running, the other windows still lit and humming quietly. Every other window was still open. Just that file gone, as if it had simply decided it was finished with him. Butcher immediately tried to trace it. Access logs, backup servers, temp file caches. He knew enough about these systems to know that nothing disappears completely. Data leaves marks even when it is deleted. It leaves timestamps, ghost entries, allocation records, the digital equivalent of an outline pressed into the page beneath. He dug for 40 minutes with the focus of a man who understood that what he had just seen was either the most important thing he had ever encountered or the beginning of something being done to him deliberately. He found nothing, not a trace. The file had no origin point in the system. It had not been uploaded. It had not been transferred. According to every log available to him, it had never existed. But Butcher had watched it. He had seen his own face on the side of a building in a London that was not his London, and he had heard the crowd, and he was not a man given to hallucinations. He had never once in his life confused what he wanted to see with what was actually there. He started talking to colleagues carefully, casually, the way you do when you need information but cannot afford to signal that you need it. A comment here, a question framed as idle curiosity there. And that was when he noticed the first thing that made the cold settle into the back of his neck and stay there. People were slightly too careful with him, not afraid exactly, more like deferential, recalibrated, in a way that had not been there the week before. A junior analyst who had barely acknowledged him on Monday was now making eye contact and holding it a beat too long before looking away, something attentive and slightly wary in her expression. A department head who had spoken to him like a contractor brought in to do a specific job was now asking his opinion on matters well outside his brief, leaning toward him when he spoke. He went back to the archive, searched his own name, and found it in 3 places it should not have been, not the records he had been hired to authenticate. Different documents, policy drafts, internal memos, his name appearing in the kind of language used to describe someone with institutional authority, not consulted, not referenced, credited, as though some version of his involvement in this department was already written into the record. Butcher pulled every document he could access and read them in the stairwell with his back against the cold concrete wall, and the door propped open with his foot, so he could hear anyone coming. The documents described legislation, a restructuring of the superhuman registry program, a new framework for managing enhanced individuals that concentrated oversight authority into a single appointed position. The language was careful, but the meaning was not. Whoever held that position would have the kind of power over registered superhumans that governments had spent decades claiming they would never allow to exist. The position had a name attached to it. His name, not as a candidate, not as a recommendation, as an incumbent, as though it had already happened. He found the final document at 11:47 p.m. He was alone in the office by then, the fluorescent lights still humming their single irritating note into the empty room. The building had the particular quality of silence that only exists when the last person you did not notice has finally left. The document was a single page, time-stamped 3 days in the future, titled simply, Authorization, Final Transfer of Registry Control. At the bottom, a signature line, his name printed beneath it in the font used for official government documentation. The signature line was blank, not yet signed, 3 days from now. Butcher stared at that blank line for a long time. The photocopier down the hall had finally gone quiet. The only sound was the ventilation system pushing recycled air through ducts that hadn't been cleaned in years. He did not know if the footage had come from somewhere else or if it was something being built toward. He did not know if the alternate London he had seen was a warning or a blueprint. What he knew, the thing that sat in his chest like a stone, cold and specific and impossible to reason away, was that someone had already written his name into the future of this. And the only thing standing between that blank signature line and what he had seen on the screen was whether Billy Butcher in 3 days would pick up a pen. The file that started all of it was never recovered. The government's official position, when pressed 6 months later during an internal inquiry, was that no such file had ever existed in their system. The inquiry was closed in 11 days. The department head who initiated it retired shortly after. His replacement was appointed without a public announcement. The registry program expanded. The oversight position described in those documents was quietly ratified in a closed session. The name attached to it was redacted from all public records.